By the third morning at Thermopylae, Leonidas was dead, his body contested in the dust, and the pass was closing from both directions. The 300 Spartans were not alone, but they had become the hard core of a rear guard facing an empire. Persian troops pressed from the front. Another force was descending from the mountain behind them. There would be no retreat. And yet, for 2 days, Xerxes had failed to break a position defended by only a few thousand Greeks. Not because the Greeks were stronger, not because Persia lacked courage, but because the battlefield had been engineered to erase numbers. Mountain on one side, sea and marsh on the other, a repaired wall at the narrowest point. Cavalry could not deploy. Archers alone could not clear the position. Thousands of soldiers could approach, but only a fraction could fight. An empire entered Thermopylae as an army. At the wall, it became a queue. To understand what Thermopylae multiplied, first strip away the number that survived. 300 Spartans did march north with King Leonidas in 480 BCE, but they did not stand alone. Waiting at the pass were contingents from across the Greek world. 500 men from Tegea, 500 from Mantinea, 400 Corinthians, 200 from Phlius, 80 from Mycenae, 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, 1,000 Phocians, and others from Arcadia and Locris. The exact total is debated, but it was several thousand, not 300. The 300 were not the army. They were the signal that an army was supposed to follow. Sparta had not yet mobilized in full. The Carneia, a major religious festival, was underway. Elsewhere, the Olympic festival also delayed the concentration of Greek forces. Leonidas therefore led an advance guard, not a complete national army. According to Herodotus, the Spartans he selected all had living sons. Behind every bronze shield stood a family line that could continue if its bearer did not return. That detail changes the scene. These were not reckless men chosen because death meant nothing. They were fathers selected because Sparta expected death to cost something. As Leonidas moved north, the coalition around him grew. Messengers summoned nearby communities. Men arrived, carrying round shields, long spears, food sacks, cloaks, and whatever provisions could be moved quickly along the road. The Thespians came under Demophilus. The Phocians came because the invasion route threatened their own land. The Thebans came under Leontiades. Though later Greek memory would argue bitterly over their loyalty, they were not one people. They were cities that distrusted one another, temporarily standing in the same corridor. And that corridor was only one half of the plan. Off the coast, a Greek fleet waited near Artemisium. The ships guarded the sea route while Leonidas guarded the road. If the Persian fleet broke through, the land position could be bypassed and supplied from the water. If Thermopylae fell, the fleet's northern position would become dangerously exposed. The pass and the strait were two locks on the same door. The Persians were approaching with infantry, cavalry, archers, engineers, animals, servants, baggage, and a fleet moving beside them. Ancient figures for Xerxes' army rise into the millions and cannot be trusted. The real number is lost. What mattered to the men waiting at Thermopylae was simpler. The Persian force was vastly larger, and the Greeks knew the reinforcements behind them had not yet arrived. If the advance guard broke too soon, central Greece would be open before the larger coalition was ready. That was why Leonidas's first battle was not against Persia. It was against fear inside his own alliance. Some Greeks at Thermopylae wanted to withdraw south and defend the Isthmus of Corinth. The Peloponnese could be narrowed there. Their homes might be protected there. But abandoning Thermopylae would expose Phocis, Locris, Boeotia, and the road toward Athens. It could also prove that the alliance was only a promise made by cities waiting for someone else to bleed first. Leonidas argued to remain. At the same time, he sent messengers demanding more troops. This was not yet a last stand. It was an attempt to hold a temporary line until a larger Greece appeared behind it. The 300 became famous because they died there. Their first purpose was to make sure the others came. The name Thermopylae means the hot gates. In 480 BCE, the heat came from sulfurous springs pushing through the ground. The gates came from the landscape. Stand on the modern site and the battlefield is difficult to understand. Today, a broad plain stretches between the highway and the distant shoreline. In Leonidas's time, the sea reached far closer to the mountains. Silt carried by rivers had not yet built the land that now fills the gulf. The army of Xerxes was not approaching an open field. It was entering a coastal corridor squeezed between water and stone. On the inland side rose the steep slopes of Mount Calidramon, part of the range connected to Oeta. On the seaward side lay the Malian Gulf, edged by marshy ground and shallow pools. The road narrowed at several points. Herodotus described one section near the approach as roughly 50 feet wide, with tighter gates near Anthela and Alpinus where a single wagon track could pass. But Leonidas did not simply place men between mountain and sea. He placed them behind a wall. Generations earlier, the Phocians had built a barrier across the passage while fighting the Thessalians. They had even diverted water from the hot springs through the corridor to make an invasion harder. By 480 BCE, parts of that defensive work had collapsed. The Greek troops repaired it with stone, earth, and whatever material the old structure would accept. That wall determined where the battle would happen. Behind it, allied contingents could rest, reorganize, and wait beyond Persian sight. At its front, only a limited number of attackers could reach the Greek shields at once. Persian cavalry could not form for a mass charge. Archers could fire over the front, but missiles alone could not clear a stone barrier defended by armored infantry. The vast army behind the first ranks still consumed food and water, but most of it could not put a spear against Leonidas. A supply line that large was a river. Thermopylae forced it through a pipe. The Greek system had 4 parts. The mountain blocked one flank, the water and marsh blocked the other. The repaired wall fixed the line, and hoplites sealed the opening. Their heavy round shields overlapped, their long spears projected beyond the first rank. When the men in front tired, another contingent could replace them through the protected space behind the wall. If any one part failed, the pass could become a prison for its defenders. And one part was already dangerously thin. Above the coastal road ran the Anopaea path. It began near the Asopus River, climbed through wooded ground across the mountain ridge, and descended near Alpinus behind the Greek position. The route was not magical or unknown to local people. The Malians had used it in an earlier war, and the Greeks learned of it after reaching Thermopylae. Leonidas sent roughly 1,000 Phocians to guard it. On the map, that closed the rear. On the mountain, it meant a long wooded route, limited visibility to sentries, and a force expected to detect an enemy before that enemy reached the descent. If the Phocians failed, the wall would not need to be breached. The Persians could stand behind it. That was the hidden bargain of Thermopylae. The terrain reduced the strength of Xerxes' army, but it also concentrated the survival of the Greeks into 2 narrow places. One was made of stone, the other was only a path through trees. From Xerxes' side of the pass, the scene did not look heroic, it looked absurd. A mounted Persian scout rode toward the Phocian wall and found a small group of Spartans outside it. Their shields and spears had been set nearby. Some men were exercising, others were combing their long hair. No panic moved through the camp, no column appeared to be preparing for flight. The scout counted what he could see, watched as long as he dared, then returned to Xerxes. His report was accurate, his conclusion was not. The wall blocked his view of the allied troops waiting behind it. He had seen the visible edge of the Greek position, not its full depth. To the Persian command, however, the distinction seemed almost irrelevant. Whether there were 300 men or several thousand, the army beyond them was still vastly larger. Now, picture the scene from Xerxes' perspective. He had crossed the Hellespont, driven roads and supply routes through hostile country, and advanced with troops drawn from across his empire. Cities had submitted before that force. Yet a small coalition now occupied the one road he needed, calmly grooming itself as if the invasion were a ceremony. Xerxes called for Demaratus, the exiled Spartan king traveling with the Persian court. Demaratus explained that the hair was not vanity. Spartans traditionally prepared it before placing themselves in mortal danger. The men at the wall were not behaving as though they had failed to understand the threat. They were behaving as though they had accepted it. Demaratus could not know exactly how the battle would unfold, but he understood the social machinery Xerxes was looking at. Discipline enforced by law, reputation, and the expectation that a Spartan line did not dissolve simply because retreat was sensible. Still, Xerxes had strong reasons to doubt him. Demaratus was an exile speaking about the greatness of the city that had cast him out. The Greek force was small. Reinforcements had not appeared. A coalition of suspicious city-states might collapse if given enough time to argue. And every hour the Persians waited increased the chance that fear would do what weapons had not yet been asked to do. So Xerxes waited. 1 day passed. Then another. 4 days went by while the Greek line remained in place. Behind the Persian front, men and animals continued to consume water, grain, and fodder. The king's decision had made sense while waiting still looked cheaper than fighting. But waiting created a debt. Each day that Leonidas remained turned a minor obstruction into a public challenge. Xerxes could not move south without clearing the road. He could not remain indefinitely before a wall held by a few thousand men, and he could not easily withdraw after bringing an imperial army to the gate. On the 5th day, he ordered the attack. Herodotus says the first troops were commanded to seize the defenders and bring them before the king alive. Medes and Sicilians moved toward the wall, expecting to overwhelm a force that had already been given every chance to run. If they broke the line quickly, Thermopylae would become a brief delay. If they failed, the entire army would learn that the road ahead was narrower than the power behind it. Xerxes had not ignored the evidence. He had read it through the logic of empire. The Spartans looked calm because they knew the pass favored them. To Xerxes, they looked calm because they had not yet understood how badly they were outnumbered. He saw exactly what the battlefield allowed him to see. The trap began with everything hidden behind the wall. When the Medes reached the wall, the size of Xerxes' army stopped being the most important number. The width of the road replaced it. The attackers came forward in ranks, carrying wicker shields, bows, short spears, and swords. Behind them stood more men than the front could use. The Greeks waited with heavy round shields locked across the opening and spear points reaching beyond the first rank. Then the corridor closed around both armies. The Medes and Sicilians had courage, training, and room behind them. What they lacked was room beside them. Only the men nearest the Greek line could strike. Those farther back added weight, noise, and pressure, but not another fighting front. 1,000 additional soldiers did not create 1,000 additional spear points. They created a deeper column pushing toward the same wall. If the Greek line opened for even a moment, the pressure behind the Persian front could flood through it. But while the shields remained joined, every attacker was forced toward the same narrow contact zone. Herodotus describes the fighting as brutal and costly. The first assault continued long enough to show that the defenders were not about to be taken alive. According to his account, Xerxes rose from his seat 3 times in alarm as he watched his men suffer. That image may carry the dramatic shape of ancient storytelling. The underlying failure is easier to explain. The Persians were attacking a formation built for close combat in the one place where their own mobility, archery, and numbers could not fully combine. The Greeks also managed exhaustion. The contingents did not all stand in the front rank until they collapsed. Units from different cities rotated through the fighting, using the protected ground behind the wall as a reserve area. Fresh shields replaced tired shields. Fresh spear arms entered the same narrow line. Persian replacements entered through the bodies, and confusion left by the previous assault. By the time the Medes withdrew, Xerxes had already paid for speed with blood. He now sent in the troops who were supposed to end the embarrassment. The Persian elite, Herodotus, called the Immortals, commanded by Hydarnes. Their corps was traditionally maintained at 10,000 men, replacing losses so its official strength never appeared to fall. On an open field, their discipline and flexibility mattered. At Thermopylae, Hydarnes inherited the same frontage. His men approached the same repaired wall, faced the same overlapping shields, and entered the reach of the same long Greek spears. Herodotus emphasizes that Persian spears were shorter. The difference did not make Persian infantry worthless. It mattered because the pass forced them into a direct contest of reach before they could exploit movement around the flanks. Elite troops had entered the battle. The battlefield had not changed for them. At points, the Spartans reportedly used a feigned retreat. Their line turned and appeared to run. Persian troops surged after them, believing discipline had finally broken. Then the Spartans wheeled back into formation and struck men whose pursuit had loosened their ranks. What looked like collapse was another way of controlling space. By evening, the Immortals had failed to open the road. On the second day, Xerxes tried again. The logic was reasonable. The Greek force was small, its front ranks had fought for hours, and wounds and fatigue should be accumulating. A second day of pressure might achieve what the first had prepared. But the Greek rotation system had protected part of the force from continuous exposure. The narrow road still limited contact. The wall still covered the reserve. The mountain and water still denied the Persians an easy flank. The second day ended with the same road closed. The army Xerxes had assembled was not failing as an army. Its soldiers, officers, archers, and elite infantry still existed, but the system could not place enough of them where their strength mattered. An empire had reached Thermopylae as an army. At the wall, it had become a queue. Xerxes had tested ordinary infantry, elite infantry, numbers, and time. None had solved the geometry. So the next attack would not be aimed at the wall. The wall had survived 2 days because it controlled where the battle could happen. Then a man from Malice offered Xerxes a place where there was no wall. His name was Ephialtes, son of Eurydemus. He knew the Anopaea path that climbed from the Asopus Valley, crossed the wooded ridge above Thermopylae, and descended near Alpinus, behind Leonidas. The route was not invisible. Local people knew it. The Greeks knew enough to guard it. What Ephialtes gave Xerxes was not the existence of the path, but a guide, a direction, and the confidence that a large force could cross it in darkness. For Xerxes, the offer solved the real problem. He did not need another assault unit. He needed to recover maneuver. Hydarnes, whose immortals had failed at the wall, was chosen to lead the night march. According to Herodotus, the column left around the time lamps were being lit. They crossed the Asopus and began climbing through oak-covered ground, while the main Persian camp remained in front of Thermopylae. The objects of the battle changed. At the wall, survival depended on bronze shields, long spears, and stone. On the mountain, it depended on darkness, leaves, sentries, and whether 1,000 tired men heard an army soon enough. Leonidas had assigned roughly 1,000 Phocians to protect the route. They were defending their own country as much as the rear of the coalition. But a mountain screen is not a wall. Men cannot stand shoulder to shoulder across every fold of a wooded ridge. They must watch paths, listen for movement, and decide which sound matters before the enemy reaches the descent. Hydarnes marched through the night. The Persians had to reach the far side before the Greeks below discovered the movement and withdrew. If dawn found them still trapped on the ridge, the entire operation could become a warning instead of an encirclement. Near daybreak, the forest gave them away. In the still air, the Phocians heard the sound of feet crushing dry oak leaves. The alarm spread. Men rose, reached for shields, and hurried into formation. Herodotus says they had been caught by surprise, and the surprise itself mattered more than the exact arrangement of their camp. Their mission depended on detecting the column before it passed. They had detected it only when it was already close. Hydarnes saw armed men forming above him and feared for a moment that they might be Spartans. Ephialtes told him they were Phocians. That answer changed the Persian decision. Hydarnes did not need to destroy them. He only needed the road behind them. Persian archers released a mass of arrows. Under the missile fire, the Phocians withdrew toward higher ground, apparently expecting the attackers to pursue and finish them. It was a rational defensive reaction. Holding the crest could preserve the unit and prepare it for close combat. But the Persians were not climbing the mountain to conquer the mountain. They turned away from the Phocians and continued along the path. The defenders had seen the threat. They had misunderstood its destination. What looked like an attack on their position was cover for a bypass. The failure was not cowardice, and it was not proof that 1,000 men could have easily sealed every route across Calidromen. It was a failure of mission under pressure. The Phocians protected themselves against the force in front of them, while the force continued toward the rear of Leonidas. By sunrise, Hydarnes had crossed the ridge and begun descending toward Alpinus. Below, the Greek defenders still faced east. The wall remained intact. Their shields still covered the road. The Persian dead from the previous assaults still lay near the narrow front. None of it could stop the column now moving behind them. Warnings began to reach Leonidas. The seer, Megistius, reading the sacrificial signs, reportedly foresaw death with the morning. Deserters from the Persian side brought news of the march. Lookouts descending from the heights confirmed that the path had been penetrated. The pass had not been broken. It had been made irrelevant. For 2 days, Thermopylae had reduced Xerxes' army to the men who could fit before the wall. Ephialtes and Hydarnes had restored the rest of the battlefield. The empire was no longer waiting in a queue. It was coming through the back door. Before sunrise, Leonidas received the same answer from 3 directions. Megistias, the Acarnanian seer, examined the sacrificial signs and warned that death would come with the morning. Men who had slipped away from the Persian camp reported that a force was crossing the mountain. Then lookouts came down from the heights and confirmed that Hydarnes was already descending toward the rear of the pass. The defenders no longer had to ask whether the position could be held. They had to decide who would still be there when it closed. Herodotus preserves 2 explanations for what followed. Some Greeks may have left because fear and disagreement finally broke the council. Others may have been dismissed by Leonidas, so their lives could be preserved for the campaign ahead. The evidence does not let us reduce the decision to one clean command. But by the last morning, most of the allied contingents were moving away from Thermopylae. The 300 Spartans remained. So did 700 Thespians under Demophilus, who, according to Herodotus, chose not to leave. 400 Thebans also remained, though Herodotus' hostile explanation of their role is disputed. Servants and helots may have been present, but their number is unknown. Even the famous last stand was not made by Spartans alone. Megistias was reportedly free to depart. Instead, he sent away his only son and remained with the rear guard. That choice reduces the final mourning to its human scale. A seer who believed the signs had already announced his death did not try to save himself. He saved the one person through whom his family could continue. Leonidas now faced a different mission. The wall could no longer stop the invasion. At best, the men who remained could delay pursuit, cover the withdrawal of others, damage the force in front of them, and refuse to let the final image be one of silent surrender. If the rear guard collapsed before the withdrawing contingents cleared the road, Persian troops could turn the retreat into a pursuit. After sunrise, Xerxes performed the customary libation. Herodotus says he delayed until roughly the hour when the marketplace normally filled, allowing Hydarnes time to approach from behind. Then, the attack began. Leonidas did not wait inside the strongest part of the position. The Greeks moved beyond the repaired wall into the wider section of the pass. It was a fatal exchange. They surrendered the geometry that had protected them, but gained room to kill more men before the encirclement closed. Persian officers drove troops forward, reportedly using whips. Men pressed into the fighting, fell from the road, were forced toward the water, or were trampled by ranks still advancing from behind. The defenders fought with spears until shafts splintered and points were lost. Then they drew short swords. Leonidas fell in the struggle. Around his body, the battle contracted into a second battlefield. Herodotus says the Greeks drove the Persians back 4 times before carrying the king's corpse away. He also places 2 of Xerxes' half-brothers, Abrocomes and Hyperanthes, among the Persian dead. The details have the shape of heroic narrative, and none of the men closest to Leonidas survived to verify them. But the violence of the contest is not difficult to believe. The king's body had become an object both armies understood. For the Greeks, recovering it preserved command, honor, and cohesion for a few more minutes. For the Persians, taking it would prove that the obstacle before Xerxes had finally been broken. Then the sound of battle changed. Hydarnes' force appeared behind the wall. The road that had protected the Greek flanks for 2 days now carried Persian troops into their rear. The survivors withdrew toward a low hill near the old fortification. Some still had swords, others fought with broken weapons. The Thebans separated and attempted to surrender, according to Herodotus, while the remaining Spartans and Thespians were compressed into the final position. There was nowhere left to rotate units. No protected space remained behind the wall. No fresh line could replace the wounded. The countdown reached its last beat. Persian troops closed from the front. Hydarnes closed from behind. Missiles came into the hill from every direction until resistance disappeared beneath arrows and thrown weapons. The pass had multiplied Greek power for 2 days. Now the open ground multiplied the price of their decision. Thermopylae did not end with the wall collapsing. It ended when there was no longer a side of the battlefield from which death was not coming. When the last arrows fell, Xerxes had won the battlefield. The road through Thermopylae was open. Persian troops moved into Phocis and Boeotia, and the invasion continued toward Attica. Athens would be occupied and burned. The Greek fleet at Artemisium could no longer remain safely in the north once the land position protecting its rear had disappeared. It withdrew toward Salamis. Measured only by territory, Thermopylae was a Persian victory. Leonidas had not stopped the invasion. The rearguard had not destroyed Xerxes' army. The delay was real, but its exact strategic value cannot be measured cleanly, and later memory made the stand larger than the military result alone. Yet the battle exposed something the scale of the Persian force had concealed. Power on a map is not the same as power at the point of contact. For 2 days, mountain, water, marsh, wall, shield, spear, and unit rotation prevented Xerxes from combining the strengths he had brought into Greece. His cavalry could not decide the battle. His numbers could not widen the front. His elite infantry could not move around the Greek line. The system recovered only when Hydarnes restored maneuver through the Anopaea path. That lesson did not guarantee what came next. Thermopylae did not cause the Greek victory at Salamis, but the same strategic instinct would reappear there. Do not meet a larger force where it can use all of itself. Draw it into confined water. Compress its frontage. Turn size into congestion. The deeper irony is that history remembered the men more clearly than the machine around them. It remembered 300 Spartans, while 700 Thespians and other defenders faded behind them. It remembered the spear wall, but rarely the Phocian wall. It remembered the front of the pass, although the battle was decided by a path behind it. Even the landscape has helped hide the mechanism. Over 25 centuries, river sediment pushed the shoreline away from the mountain. The ancient corridor beside the Malian Gulf became a plain several kilometers wide. A visitor standing near the monument to Leonidas now looks across open ground where an imperial army once struggled to deploy. The gate is gone. That may be the most fitting monument to Thermopylae. The terrain that made the stand possible has almost disappeared, leaving behind a story often detached from the geography that created it. The 300 did not become an army. For 2 days, Thermopylae prevented an army from becoming one. Subscribe for more hidden turning points where terrain, deception, and overlooked decisions changed the fate of war.